Elias said, "I only wanted us to talk tonight." But Marina's eyes were cold as glass while she stood in the doorway, holding her coat like she couldn't wait to escape the life he represented. Marina said, "You'll die poor, and I can't keep pretending you'll ever change." And the words slammed into him harder than any failure he had endured. He watched her turn away, her footsteps fading like she was walking out of his world for good. A quiet tremble ran through him as he wondered how their love had soured into something sharp enough to cut him open. How long had she felt this way? What truth was he blind to? Why did she believe money measured his worth? And who planted such bitterness in her heart? The shop lights flickered over his silent shock, making him question whether this moment would be the wound he could never heal. Elias said, "Tomorrow will be different." Though he barely believed it, sitting at his workbench before sunrise as the quiet hum of the shop filled the space Marina once brought laughter to, he stared at the scattered blueprints, trying to silence the ache in his chest long enough to focus on the device he'd promised himself had finished. Every small click of metal reminded him of her leaving, but he worked anyway, forcing himself to breathe through the hurt. He wondered whether he had failed her or whether she had misunderstood the life he had tried to build for both of them. He struggled to shake off the sting of her words while tightening screws and adjusting small gears. Still, as dawn crept in through the shop windows, a faint determination stirred in him, pushing back at the hollow silence she left behind. Marina said, "I just need space," but the empty apartment didn't give her the comfort she expected. She walked circles around her living room, replaying Elias's stunned silence over and over, each repetition pulling at the knot in her stomach. She tried to tell herself she was right, that his small life was holding her back, yet her voice kept cracking whenever she whispered the words aloud. She felt the echo of something she refused to name, fear that she had crossed a line she couldn't undo. She wondered if he was thinking about her, or if he simply returned to his tools like she meant nothing. Her chest tightened at the thought, and she sank onto the couch, hugging a pillow as the argument stretched across her mind like a bruise she couldn't ignore. Elias said, "Maybe this is my chance," trying to breathe life into fragile hope as he polished the metal frame of his invention. The shop was quieter than usual, the shadows longer, making the air feel heavy with old memories. He moved slowly, not from age, but from the weight of Marina's rejection, lingering like a bruise across his thoughts. Still, he forced himself to imagine a future where his creation mattered, where someone saw value in the years he poured into it. He wondered if Marina would ever understand why he worked so late, why he sacrificed so much without asking for praise. As he tightened the final bolt, a small click echoed through the room, giving him a momentary spark, perhaps the first good sign in a long time. Marina said, "I just need to move forward," but her voice cracked as she stared at her silent phone, wondering if Elias expected an apology she didn't know how to give. She sat at her kitchen table, tapping her fingers restlessly, her thoughts shifting between anger and regret. The apartment felt colder today, and every time she glanced at the door, she imagined Elias standing there with that quiet, hopeful smile he always forced when he wanted to hide his hurt. She wondered when their bond had slipped into something so fragile. As she scrolled through job emails, her focus blurred, and she fought the sinking feeling that she had pushed the one steady person in her life too far away to reach again. Elias said, "Just a little more," as he leaned over his workbench, steadying the final piece of his invention with careful hands. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, wrapping the room in a soft glow that made the metal gleam like a promise he wasn't sure he deserved. Though Marina's words still echoed in the back of his mind, he pushed through the ache, letting each click in turn guide him towards something that felt like hope. He wondered if anyone would ever care about the years he poured into this device, or if it would end up forgotten like so many of his past ideas. Still, as he tightened the last screw and heard the soft snap of the hinge settling perfectly into place, a spark of pride tugged at him, small but steady, reminding him that giving up had never been in his nature. Marina said, "I need to focus on myself." But even as she said it aloud, the words felt thin. She sat at her desk surrounded by paperwork she'd been ignoring, tapping a pen against an empty notebook, while her thoughts drifted back to Elias' stunned expression. Every time she tried to push the memory aside, it came back sharper, like a reminder she couldn't outrun. Guilt tugged at her chest, but pride made her push it down, telling herself she couldn't look back now. Still, a small tremor ran through her when she wondered if Elias was working late again, or if he simply went quiet, shutting the world out the way he always did when hurt. She tried to return to her tasks, but her focus kept slipping, swallowed by the fear that she may have broken something she wasn't ready to lose. Clara said, "This place has stories," as she stepped into Elias's workshop, scanning the shelves stacked with strange tools and dusty inventions. Elias paused, caught off guard by her presence, but Clara's warm smile softened the sharpness of his surprise. She explained she was documenting small local businesses, but her eyes kept drifting toward the odd device on the table. Elias hesitated, unsure whether to hide it or share, his heart tightening with the fear of being dismissed again. Yet something about Clara's calm curiosity encouraged him to speak. As he described the concept behind his invention, her expression brightened, and for the first time in a long while, Elias felt like someone genuinely saw him. He realized that her interest could shift the quiet path he'd been walking for years. Elias said, "It's nothing special," trying to downplay the invention. But Clara laughed softly and shook her head, insisting it was more impressive than he realized. Her enthusiasm unsettled him in a good way, stirring hope he'd almost forgotten how to feel. She asked if she could take a few photos for her feature, and Elias hesitated only long enough for doubt to flicker before agreeing. As she moved around the room adjusting angles, he watched her work with focused energy, realizing she saw meaning not only in his device, but also in the years behind it. He wondered what Marina would say if she knew someone cared enough to look closely. The thought pierced him, but he steadied himself, reminding his heart that this moment wasn't about the past. It was about possibility. Marina said, "I should be happy for myself." But her voice faded as she scrolled through social feeds filled with achievements of people she barely knew. Each post made the silence from Elias feel heavier. She wondered if he'd eaten, or if he spent the night buried in tools trying not to think about her. The thought twisted something deep inside her. She tried distracting herself by making coffee, but the bitterness tasted sharper than usual, mirroring the tension she carried. She tried to imagine calling him, yet fear gripped her every time she pictured his disappointment. Pride pushed her away, but regret kept pulling her back, leaving her stuck in a place neither forward nor backward, just painfully in between. Clara said, "I shared your story this morning," and Elias felt the air shift around him as if her words carried a weight he wasn't ready to hold. He stood frozen beside his workbench, listening as she explained how people were responding faster than she expected, leaving comments that praised the creativity he had spent years doubting. Elias tried to steady his breathing, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified, because the attention he never asked for was rushing toward him like a tidal wave. He wondered how Marina would react if she knew strangers admired the work she once dismissed. A small warmth bloomed in his chest, followed by a tremor of fear, as if success had arrived wrapped in questions he wasn't prepared to face. Marina said, "What now?" as she scrolled through her notifications, confused by messages from coworkers asking if she was related to someone they had mentioned only vaguely. She blinked at her phone, unsure why people suddenly cared about her family, and a slow unease crept into her chest. She told herself it didn't matter, yet her heartbeat picked up as she sensed something shifting just beyond her view. When another message buzzed, someone telling her she must be proud. Her breath caught, and she froze. A strange mix of dread and curiosity twisted inside her, pressing her to understand what was happening in the world she had tried to cut herself from. Clara said, "People are asking more questions," and Elias felt a strange flutter in his stomach, unsure whether to welcome the attention or run from it. She explained how the story gained momentum, how readers shared it across different circles, each one surprised by the quiet man who had spent years building in shadows. Elias listened, gripping the edges of his workbench, overwhelmed by the idea that strangers were drawn to something he created with trembling hands and old tools. He wondered if Marina had seen anything yet, and the thought brought a sharp pull to his chest. Part of him wished she were here to witness the small spark he had guarded alone for so long. Marina said, "This makes no sense," as she stepped into the hallway of her apartment building, pacing with her phone pressed against her palm. Her heart drummed faster with each passing second, driven by a growing fear that something important was happening without her. She kept telling herself she didn't care, yet her hands shook as she scrolled through messages she didn't understand. A voice inside her whispered that she had pushed Elias away at the worst possible moment, and the thought stung with a sharpness she didn't expect. She tried to steady her breath, but every step felt heavier, as if the world had suddenly tilted in a direction she wasn't prepared to follow. Elias said, "I didn't think anyone would notice," as he sat on a stool, watching Clara pack her equipment with the ease of someone used to uncovering stories. She told him that people respond to honesty, to the quiet effort behind his work, and the words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't used to being seen, not like this, and the quiet part of his heart that had grown used to disappointment felt shaken. He wondered what Marina would think if she knew all of this, and the question sliced deeper than he wanted to admit. Still, as he looked at the device resting proudly on the table, he sensed that something had shifted inside him, something that refused to be small again. Lucia said, "So now everyone's talking about you," walking into Elias's workshop with a tone sharp enough to slice through his fragile calm. Elias tried to smile, but her raised eyebrow carried more judgment than pride, reminding him how long she had doubted his choices. She circled the room slowly, eyeing the invention like she was weighing its worth against every mistake she believed he'd made. Elias felt the tension rise in his chest, torn between wanting her approval and knowing she came only because others were paying attention now. He wondered if Marina had spoken to Lucia, or if this sudden interest came from the noise surrounding him. A quiet fear crept in, whispering that success might draw the wrong kind of attention into the cracks of a family already struggling to hold itself together. Marina said, "Why would anyone contact me about him?" As she paced her living room with increasing urgency, more messages arrived from people she hadn't spoken to in years, each one hinting at some rising attention around her father. She tried to block out the thought, but fear twisted through her, making her wonder what she had walked away from so carelessly. She imagined Elias alone in his workshop, overwhelmed by strangers wanting pieces of him after years of ignoring him. The thought unsettled her, stirring guilt she tried to swallow. She wasn't sure if she was angry at the world for suddenly noticing him or at herself for not being there when he needed someone to understand him. Her breath caught as she realized she might be the last to know what was happening. Lucia said, "You should have told me about this sooner," but Elias could hear the edge beneath her words, the part that hinted she wasn't here to celebrate him. She questioned his plans, his choices, even the years he spent building in silence, as if the sudden attention gave her permission to rewrite the past. Elias tried to answer calmly, but her tone scraped old wounds he thought had faded. He wondered if she had come for support or to take control of something she didn't understand. Each question she pushed felt heavier, making him worry that the quiet life he protected was slipping from his hands faster than he could hold it. He tried to breathe through the pressure, telling himself that he had survived worse storms. Still, her presence made the workshop feel smaller than ever. Marina said, "I need answers," as she sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed by the thought that the world knew more about her father's life than she did. She scrolled through half-hidden posts and vague messages from relatives who suddenly remembered her number. A knot formed in her stomach as she imagined Lucia stepping into the situation, twisting the moment to fit her own interests. Marina felt frustration rising, mixed with regret she didn't want to name. She wondered if Elias was happy or terrified, and the not knowing scraped at her like a quiet punishment. She tried to swallow her pride, but it bitterly clung to her thoughts, leaving her unsure whether she wanted to run toward the truth or hide from it altogether. Elias said, "I just want some peace." But the shop buzzed with voices as two distant relatives showed up uninvited, talking over each other about opportunities he never asked for. He tried to calm them, though their eager questions made him feel like an object rather than a person. As they hovered around the invention, Elias felt the room shrinking again, filled with noise instead of the quiet he needed. He wondered how quickly word had spread and how many more would appear with smiles shaped by their own gain. The chaos made him think of Marina, and for a moment he wished she were here. Not to fix anything, but simply to stand beside him. The thought ached deeper than he expected, reminding him that success meant nothing if it pushed him further from the person he still hoped to reach. Elias said, "There are things she never knew," as he sat alone in the quiet workshop after everyone finally left, the silence settling like dust over memories he had tried to bury. He traced a finger along the edge of his invention, feeling both pride and sorrow rise in him. He thought of Marina, growing up believing he chose a small life when the truth was far heavier. He had made choices that cost him more than she ever realized. Choices meant to protect her from the chaos that once tore their family apart. The ache in his chest deepened as he wondered whether revealing the past would heal anything or only drive a deeper wedge between them. Still, a whisper inside him insisted it was time for her to finally know why he sacrificed so much. Marina said, "Why didn't he tell me anything?" as she sat at her table staring at a blinking cursor on her phone, unable to decide whether to call him. Her chest tightened as she replayed years of small moments, times when he looked tired, times when he almost said something before swallowing the words, times she brushed him off without asking why his eyes seemed heavier. She realized she had never wondered what he carried alone. The thought shook her, leaving her with a guilt that grew sharper the longer she sat in the quiet apartment. She pressed her phone to her heart, trying to breathe through the fear that the truth might hurt more than the distance between them already did. Elias said, "She deserves the truth," though his voice trembled as he finally opened the old wooden box he hadn't touched in years. Inside lay documents he once hoped never to show her. Letters, unpaid notices, and a faded photo that carried the weight of the day he chose her future over his own. He remembered the moment he abandoned his dream job offer to take over the failing repair shop after her mother left, determined that Marina wouldn't grow up in the instability that once scarred him. His chest tightened as he wondered if she would understand or accuse him of hiding too much. Yet the truth had lived in silence long enough, and he felt the time had come to break it open before it destroyed what was left between them. Marina said, "I should have asked him sooner," as she walked slowly through her apartment, trying to piece together every moment she had misunderstood. Memories flooded her. Birthdays he worked through, nights he stayed awake fixing things she broke, mornings he hid his worry behind forced smiles. Each memory twisted inside her, reshaping a truth she once believed so firmly. She realized she had judged him through the lens of her own fears, never imagining he had fears of his own. The weight of what she didn't know pressed down on her, leaving her breathless, as if the room itself were shrinking around her. She felt an urgency rise in her, a pull to face the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was. Elias said, "It's time she knows," as he packed the documents back into the wooden box, hands trembling with the fear of reopening old wounds. He imagined the conversation they would have, the questions Marina would ask, and the anger that might surface once she learned how much he had hidden to protect her. Yet beneath the fear was a small, steady hope that honesty might give them a chance to rebuild what had cracked between them. He took a slow breath, reminding himself that love sometimes meant revealing the hardest truths. As he closed the box, he felt both terrified and relieved, knowing this would change everything between them. one way or another. Marina said, "I need to see him." Though fear wrapped tightly around her voice as she hurried down the street, unsure whether she was too late to fix what she had broken. Her steps echoed through the evening air, each one carrying regret she could no longer hide. She imagined Elias sitting alone, weighed down by memories she had never cared to ask about, and the thought tightened her chest until breathing felt difficult. She wondered what he would say when he saw her, or if he would turn away after everything she had done. Still, something stronger than pride pushed her forward, telling her that silence had gone on long enough. As she approached his neighborhood, anxiety pulsed through her, warning her that the truth could hurt more than the words she once threw at him. Elias said, "Just breathe," gripping the edge of the counter as a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. The long day had drained him more than he expected, and the pressure from relatives, Clara's messages, and the looming conversation with Marina pressed heavily on his chest. He tried to steady himself, telling his body to hold on, but the room felt tight, the air too thin, his thoughts scattering like loose bolts falling from a shelf. He felt a sharp pull in his chest, and fear flickered through him as he wondered whether he had pushed himself too far. He tried to take a step toward the chair, but his legs trembled, warning him that something inside him was giving way. Marina said, "Please answer," whispering the words as she tried calling Elias again, her pace quickening when he didn't pick up. Panic built inside her, rising faster than she could manage. She imagined him alone, struggling, exhausted from the pressure she helped create, and the guilt clawed deeper into her chest. She told herself it was just a bad signal or that he was busy, but each unanswered ring felt like a countdown she didn't understand. Her breath grew uneven as she turned the corner toward his street, hoping the truth waiting for her wasn't one she would have to carry for the rest of her life. The fear of losing him before she could fix anything pushed her faster. Elias said, "Not now," barely getting the words out as the room tilted sharply around him. He reached for the table but missed, his hand brushing empty air. A burst of pain shot through his chest, overwhelming every thought he tried to hold. He felt his knees weaken, the world spinning as though pulled away from him. Fear rushed in, not for himself, but for the unfinished truth he needed to share with Marina before everything slipped out of reach. He tried to call her name, but the sound caught in his throat as his vision blurred. The last thing he felt was the cold floor against his palms as his strength gave out completely. Marina said, "Dad, please be okay," as she ran up to his door, her fists pounding against the wood when he didn't answer. Her breath came fast and uneven, driven by fear sharper than anything she had felt before. She tried the handle and pushed inside, her heart collapsing as she saw him on the kitchen floor, unmoving. Every horrible thought she'd ever had about him crashed into her at once, filling her with a regret so deep it nearly knocked her down. She knelt beside him, calling his name over and over, her voice breaking as she begged him to wake up. All the anger she once held dissolved instantly, replaced by a desperate need to keep him alive long enough to undo the damage she had done. Marina said, "Please stay with me," her voice trembling as she waited outside the hospital room, gripping the edge of the plastic chair like it was the only thing holding her upright. The world around her blurred into quiet footsteps, distant beeping, and the low murmur of nurses passing by, but all she could focus on was the fear that she might have waited too long to come back to him. She replayed every harsh word she had spoken, each one burrowing deeper as she realized how close she came to losing the chance to make things right. She wondered if Elias would even want to see her when he woke, or if the pain she caused had finally pushed him beyond forgiveness. Still, the thought of leaving him now felt unbearable, and she whispered silent promises into the air, hoping he could hear her through the door. Elias said, "You came," his voice barely a whisper, when he finally opened his eyes to see Marina standing at his bedside, with tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Relief washed through her so fast she nearly lost her balance, and she reached for his hand with shaking fingers. He tried to smile, though the effort tugged at his tired body, and she felt guilt swell inside her until it became hard to breathe. She apologized in broken words, each confession filling the room with the years of distance she wished she could erase. Elias listened quietly, letting her speak, his eyes soft with the understanding he had always carried. When he squeezed her hand, she felt something inside her settle, like a bridge slowly rebuilding between them. Elias said, "I never wanted you to feel abandoned," before telling Marina the truth he had carried alone. The day he chose stability over ambition, the sacrifices he made so she wouldn't grow up surrounded by chaos. Marina listened without speaking, her hand covering her mouth as each piece of his past rearranged everything she once believed. She felt guilt sink deeper, but beneath it grew a clearer picture of a man who had loved her harder than she had ever understood. She realized how blind she had been, how quickly she had judged his life without knowing the weight behind it. When Elias admitted he hid the truth because he didn't want her to worry, something broke quietly inside her, a barrier built from pride dissolving into painful clarity. Marina said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness," but Elias shook his head slowly, reminding her that love wasn't earned by perfection, but by trying when it mattered most. His words hit her with a tenderness she felt she hadn't earned, and she lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the depth of his patience. She told him she wanted to do better, to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed, even if it took time. Elias listened with quiet acceptance, sensing the sincerity she struggled to express. The distance between them felt smaller now, replaced by a fragile hope that settled gently over the space they shared. Marina felt something shift inside her, a promise that she would not run from this again. Elias said, "Let's go home when I'm ready," and the words filled Marina with a hope she hadn't felt in years. She nodded, wiping her eyes, promising she would be there, really be there, when he returned. The fear that once clouded her view had finally lifted, replaced by a steady warmth that made her believe they could rebuild a life, not defined by anger or disappointment, but by understanding. She felt grateful for a second chance she almost lost, knowing she would carry the lesson with her far beyond this room. As she squeezed his hand gently, she realized that this wasn't an ending but the start of something softer, something stronger, something built on truth instead of fear.